Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, the Geek Show's podcast dedicated to the good, the bad and the inexplicable of movies either starring by or about pop stars. The podcast covers such a broad range of cinematic and musical genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm Graham Williamson. I'm a film critic for thegeekshow.co.uk and horrified.com. And this week I've been joined by...
I'm Mark Harrison. I'm a writer and occasional quizmaster for filmstories.co.uk and VODzilla.co.
Now, our movie today was designed to bring the truth to the masses, the truth that all art is propaganda, that the American entertainment industry is owned by the military-industrial complex, and that everyone's problems go away when Rosario Dawson calls them a rock star. The general public were not ready for this runaway train of truth, however, and it flopped. While it is not, as its joke subliminal message claims, the best movie ever, its cult following has grown with every passing year. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for the film that put the Arch into Archie comics, Josie and the Pussycats. So yeah, Matt, you suggested this to me.
Yep, I'm glad we've gone for it. I had the idea after listening to the Spice World podcast on my pop screen earphones. They're very good pop screen earphones. I bought two of them, in fact, especially for listening to this podcast. I just think that Josie and the Pussycats makes such an interesting pairing, antidote, if you will, to Spice World, because it's kind of the same moment, but it nails the satire so much better than Spice World.
Yeah, and Alan Cumming is good in this.
Yeah, Alan Cumming is in both as well. There's a few things that connect them. For me, it's, as you said, it's kind of grown in stature as a cult classic over time, even though it is such a time capsule of the precise moment when it was made, not just 2001, but in the first half of 2001, very specifically, and towards the end of the sort of MTV boom, I would say, like at a point when boy bands and pop stars were still coming along and all the rest of it, but it has this. In many, like, kind of uncynical view, I would say, like, it's got a very uncynical view of its characters, but its industry satire is top notch, I would say. Like, its portrayal of the moment that it's in exceeds that of Spice World, for starters, because, well, it's written and directed by Harry Elfont and Deborah Kaplan, who are younger than the writer and director of Spice World are. All respect to Bob Spears and Kim Fuller, they are maybe not the ideal people to be. I mean,
with a level of respect to Bob Spears and Kim Fuller, let's not go crazy here.
Yeah. They're both fine in their own regard, but not necessarily well equipped to do a film about a girl band and about everything that Spice World is about.
Yeah, I just want to go into that sort of time capsule thing that you mentioned, because when I watched this, I thought this is a film about a very, very specific point in time, which is the passage of time from the millennium to 9/11, which feels like the shortest spell of time I've lived through, where you can definitely put your finger on it and say, oh yeah, that was its own thing.
Yeah, and it's the shortness of time in that spell is very much a part of the film as well. Like, at one point, we'll get onto it, but at one point, someone turns around and says, "Does anyone think it's strange that this all happened in a week?"
Yeah.
The fleetingness of the bands who are in it and their shot at fame feels very of the time. Like, for me, I was around about 10 or 11 when this film came out, and the era that it's doing was kind of my era of the summer between primary school and secondary school, going discos and community centers and stuff, and it's just what was in the charts at that point. American pop, as well as the British versions of that.
In fact, there is a caption on screen at one point when it begins with a boy band apparently dying in a plane crash. They're called De Jour, and there's a wonderfully brutal caption that just says De Jour, 2000 to 2001. And you think, there were a lot of bands who had that 2000 to 2001 run, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's to start with the opening, it's just incredibly funny from the off. It's like this, just to talk about where this is from. This is adapted from the Archie comic series, and also, to a lesser extent, but also format-wise quite similar, the Hanna-Barbera cartoon series that came out of that. And it's kind of, there's been a few at this point when the film comes out. It's a year before the James Gunn scripted Scooby-Doo film comes out, and it's quite a few years after you've had like the Flintstones and those other live action adaptations of the 90s. And the point at which you're in for something different from this film is if you're paying close enough attention right at the very beginning when Dejua's opening song. I mean, I've made the promise to myself we're going to be the only podcast about this film that gets through without men doing a dramatic reading of the lyrics to Backdoor Lover. But if it's one of those things where if you're just easing into the film, if you're not paying too much attention, like you haven't quite heard the lyrics, and then there's a line like lying on your bed looking up the moon. And it's this song is really dirty and really funny. And so perfectly keep with the nonsensical, child-friendly erotica that was coming out of boy bands at the time.
Because it does sound absolutely spot on, doesn't it? That's the first thing that hits you. It absolutely has that kind of NSYNC Blue kind of era of boy band sound down to a T.
Yeah, it's one of those comedy films where the comedy soundtrack isn't just, oh, you can't believe that would ever be a chart hit. The songs are all authentic, and it's mostly really only Backdoor Lover, I would say, is the only full-on comedy song.
That's the one where it tips a wink, yeah. But there are some interesting people working on the music. The late Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne, who died last year, writes and produces several of the tracks. Some of the poppier ones, like Backdoor Lover, produced by Babyface, who was like this ubiquitous R&B producer of the 90s, worked with Toni Braxton, Whitney Houston, anyone who was in that field of music at the time. And he gets this fabulously weird cameo, which is very, very funny, as the chief, the power behind the throne of the captain and Tennille, which is, that's a really niche joke.
They said love was keep us together. Guess what? It didn't.
He's really funny in that. I wish he'd acted more.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, they do with that, with that talent backing it up. There is a good. You mentioned that the film didn't do well at the box office, whereas the soundtrack for the film is like a gold, has gold certified record. The soundtrack did much better than the film. But out of that opening scene where you have Dejua performing on the tarmac, they go, they get onto a plane and go away, and they just have this first scene where they're just bickering over who has the best face. Like the band is made up of it's basically just a who's who of like teen movies at this point. You've got like Seth Green, Breckin Meyer, and Donald Faison, and that's kind of where the who's who ends, because I don't really know who Alexander Martin is.
I don't know who he is, but he's doing a very good job of persuading you that he's the Justin Timberlake of Dejua, isn't he? By which I mean a little corporate bitch.
On the other hand, he's the one who makes it. So yeah, also in another regard, that's exactly it. But yeah, they have this this moment where they're talking to the manager, who's Wyatt Frame, who's played by Alan Cumming, and they say we were working on remixes of the new singles, and we heard this weird thing underneath. What is this? And she goes, oh, I'll go check that out for you. I'll get you some answers. Close the door, and immediately, the song already tells you're in for something special. But this is the joke that made me laugh so hard right at the beginning, is that he says to the pilot of the plane, take the Chevy to the levee, which is code for crash this plane, which is a really, really funny joke right there, just right at the top of it. And then, so they stage a big plane crash and get rid of this band who are onto the fact that they're going to control the youths of America with this music. So that's what sets off the film. It's kind of the crash land in Riverdale, which is where the Archie comics are all set, and they're walking into town to find the next big band.
We should probably say that, listeners, if your ears pricked up at the mention of Riverdale, this is all part of the same family, essentially. Archie comics have had a very long and weird journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's new of younger listeners will be more familiar, I think, with the Riverdale series more recently. It's popped up on Netflix, and the Sabrina series, the reboots and stuff. But yeah, long-running series.
It feels like every sort of 5 years or so, Archie Comics does something that makes everyone go, huh, Archie's doing really weird, subversive stuff now. And if I was them, I'd sort of be annoyed that this wasn't sort of sticking in people's heads. But anyway, it was this really weird series because the original idea of it was inspired by a movie, actually, by the Mickey Rooney, Andy Hardy films, which were one of the first American movies to really deal with teenage life back when that was rather rarer in films than it was at the turn of the millennium. And they were parodied and they became parodies themselves. And even at this late stage, there was actually a PG certificate cut of this film made because Archie Comics were not happy with some of the sex jokes and some of the swearing in it. But this millennium, they've just gone full on and started publishing things like Archie versus Predator, which is...
I didn't know about that, but I might have to check that out. The on the thing of them not liking the content of the film, there is a thing of them sort of disavowing it at the time. And I did read around while I was reading about this that one of their notes was insisting that there be a scene where the Pussycats are cleaning their teeth to reaffirm their status as role models. And it's weird that even on a film that is this much about corporate control, that there's an element of that going on in the background. Just like, okay, do all of this, but there's a scene where they're going to brush their teeth, and in the background you will see a shower curtain with a McDonald's logo on it. I mean, should we get into the product placement aspect?
We should, because it is pretty incredible.
It gets absurd. I mean, I think one of the best things this film pulls off is that, you know, the backdoor lover thing. Another thing that it underlines is that they're doing this thing. They're sneaking in these lyrics into, you know, what's still a PG-13 kind of family film, that kind of thing. It does get you looking, you know, in the same ways that like The Naked Gun and Airplane will have background gags. It's like this does that for product placement, and it tells you that's what it's doing. It wouldn't necessarily be funny in and of itself if it wasn't stuff like as I mentioned, there's a McDonald's shower curtain at one point, and Tara Reid washing herself with a box, a carton of fries as a loofah, and the windows in their flat have like Revlon logos, like it's the wind. It's non-stop, and it draws attention to itself doing it, but it's bedded into this thing of them trying to sell things to the teenage audience. Through Josie and the Pussycats, you know, once they're discovered in Riverdale, that becomes they pretty much mean to pick up where they left off with de jure and keep putting these subliminal messages into music for teenagers that we're not buying pink clothes anymore, we're buying red clothes. Red is the new pink. And then they hear a different song going, no, orange clothes are cool now, with their bags full of red shopping, going like, no, orange is the new red. And but you know, it's on top of that. It has that thing of where I think that Spice World and its satirical stuff about this band as product, it is the band as products to some extent. I still think Spice World. Whereas this is saying that this is speaking to teenagers on their level. I would suggest a bit more. It's saying that it's not that you are all mindless drones. It's that the Bond villain level threat of this film is that they will all turn you into mindless drones.
Yeah, and I had kind of mixed feelings about that. At first, I thought the depiction of the popular girls, the ones who are saying, oh, pink's the new red, no, it's orange, was kind of mean-spirited. But as it went on, it was balanced out by, I think, the depiction of Melody, the Tara Reid character, who is like someone who, on the one hand, is kind of an airhead, but on the other hand, the film genuinely likes, and it really admires her innocence. And then in the end, you know, the whole conspiracy comes down to people's neuroses that they haven't dealt with. It does become more sort of forgiving in an interesting way as it moves on.
Yeah, like I think that the bitchy girls earlier on are kind of excused by the fact that when you see Josie at one point under the influence of the subliminal messaging through music, she becomes a dick as well. And the threat is that, you know what, it's making people not be nice to each other.
Much like Twitter, really. It predicted Twitter. Yeah.
One of many ways in which this film's incredibly prescient, I would say.
So the band, we've mentioned Tara Reid, Rachel Leigh Cook as Josie, and Rosario Dawson as Valerie, which had... Did you read who auditioned for Valerie, by the way?
I did, yes. It's an interesting, considering this podcast normally does films with actors, with singers acting. That's
Yes.
quite a rogues gallery, yeah.
Yeah, because as far as I can remember, Babyface was the only actual pop star cameo in here. But if the casting for Valerie had worked out differently, it could have been either Beyonce, Aaliyah, or Lisa Left Eye Lopez from TLC.
Yeah, it's they did wind up casting all actors because they were looking for people who do the comedy as the reason that they gave, but they did end up using on the soundtrack, they ended up using professional singers to do the vocals, and the actors were all doing backing vocals on the tracks. I think it's Kate Hanley from Letters to Cleo
Yes, yes, it is.
who does Cook's vocals, and the other two are kind of done by a Canadian singer called Biff Naked. Yeah, but as I said, we mentioned the soundtrack, and I think that's one of the reasons it's endured, more people discovering it through that. And you know, they did like a vinyl release of it recently as well. I think 12 years ago. Yeah, they did. Mondo did put out a vinyl version of it. I was reading about that. But
How wonderful.
Yeah. It's just odd, really. This film's out the same year as Zoolander is, and I think it's looking at a different industry, yes, but it's got the same silly, like it's got the same quotable. Like, this is so funny. I mean, it's from the take the Chevy to the Levy thing is obviously going to go to all the music fans as well. But there's so much in there all the way through. There's like you mentioned Melody just being a sweetheart in general. There's a point where they're talking about the villain of the film and she's saying, like, "Oh, she gives me the creeps. She sends a chill up my spine." And they've got, "Oh, sweetie, that's because she's sitting on the O." And she's sitting on like the ice sculpture of the villain's name with like a
yes.
It's beautifully played. It's done like it's not cynical in the way that satire sometimes can be. It loves its, as you said, it loves its characters.
It does, although there are some bits that are kind of, I don't know, I won't say shocking, but when you think this is 2001, this is like comes out in April 2001, and if just like half a year later, you've got that massive swell of patriotism and the start of the war on terror. The bit with Eugene Levy doing this sort of military propaganda video about how America is the most ass-kicking country in the whole world feels like the kind of joke that Hollywood would really shrink back from very, very soon.
Yeah, it to some extent does feel like the last film of its moment, as well as capturing it so well. It's the timing of it's wild.
The weird thing about the timing too is that this came out just 2 months after the Simpsons episode New Kids on the Blech. I don't know how to pronounce that Mad Magazine
I remember,
noise. Sorry.
I remember that one where the band's subliminal message Ivan Etnioj, which has joined the Navy backwards. Yes. I was just about to check. I was just about to look up actually when that came out, when it was. But yeah, that same year. What it's wild that it came up, but again, fits in the time capsule.
Just a boggling coincidence. I have a theory about why this was sort of in the air around this time, which is that people were looking back at the 1990s and thinking, all right, the first big thing that happened in American music in the 90s was Nirvana, and the last big thing that happened was NSYNC. How did this decade that was really cynical in a lot of ways about things that were corporate, things that were manufactured, how did this end up in like this flood of boy bands?
Yeah. Well, the version of that they give with direct reference to Nirvana is there's a scene where Wyatt plays DeJure's last single in a record shop and is approached by a lass in a Prince t-shirt who says, "Oh, this is crap. Everyone just, this is crap. Everyone's just following this. It's not even good." And he's like, "Oh, right. Well, we always like to hear from people like you in the music industry." And like his American Pie reference, he goes, "Smells like Teen Spirit" into his phone, which I thought was going to be an incredibly dark joke. But you do see her again later on, just plugged into a machine. And I thought, like, just following on from what was set up earlier, I thought that's incredibly dark, and I'd forgotten about it. But you see her later in this facility where they're sort of brainstorming what the next thing is going to be, whether it's orange clothing. There's one point they scan past a model, someone modeling clothing that's being described as, it's a sort of Buffy meets Chicken Run outfit. And it's full of like little jokes like that in the background. But unlike with the Simpsons episode, it's the idea of the military being interested in this as a recruitment tool. It's to a lesser extent than in the Simpsons episode, but yeah, it's got Parker Posey playing the, well, as I've said already, the Bond villain figure of this, really. And as it goes through, as I said, it's a film that loves its characters. That's part of why it's so funny and enjoyable, is that it loves all of its characters, and that even the villain turns out to have been in some way a victim of this, the processing of commercialization of pop music.
Yeah, Posey is an interesting character. I mean, it's a great performance. I do love Parker Posey in general. Love Parker Posey. Yeah, her outfits are very proto-Hunger Games, I thought.
Yeah.
This idea of a sort of decadent upper class who wear these bizarre costumes. Yeah, we should probably talk a little about the band themselves. Who, I mean, I was thinking about them in terms of what was in the air at the time, and there was that sort of brief boom of pop punk led by Blink 182. But the other thing is, like, around the same summer that this came out, Avril Lavigne came out, and I think if you played someone Avril Lavigne videos and Josie and the Pussycats videos, like in a blind taste test, if they hadn't heard of either, and said, which of these is a fake musical artist made for a satirical film about the music industry being corporate and dull, they would obviously choose Avril Lavigne.
Yeah, well, it's
I know you're meant to like her now, but I'm going to stand against that.
I'm saying that, like, it's the success of the soundtrack in its own time speaks to how much this is liked, and that by the end of the film there is a thing of, well, just listen to this and see if you like it, and if you like it, you like it. And granted, because it's a happy ending, the audience kind of falls on the side of it. I do think that, like, part of the reason why this excels over Spice World as well is it does sort of, like, I think that with Spice World, the making of it is something a bit remote, that the people who are behind it are sort of at arm's length from it, and that this isn't looking down on what teenage girls like the way that so many things were around this specific moment in cultural history, if you know what I mean. Like, there's like, looking through this, you can see, like, Roger Ebert's review from the time, from like the time it came out, or to this, like, excoriating thing of Josie and the Pussycats aren't dumber than the Spice Girls, but they are as dumb, and that's just about dumb enough. And it sort of leads into this thing of, like, why isn't it taking the piss out of this music as much as it's taking the piss out of all the other aspects? It's like, well, because the music doesn't have to be inherently bad. It's I mean, it's of its moment, and if you're into, but I think that if you're into pop punk, because people who still appreciating the soundtrack it's like, it works as an authentic soundtrack.
Yeah, I did. I found kind of the baroque end of that pop punk era pretty annoying, but I did, during the whole of my adolescence, have a massive soft spot for, like, female punk bands, to the extent where one friend of mine once asked me, who's that, like, teenage girl punk band you like where they're always drunk and the lyrics are really funny? And I thought, you're gonna have to narrow this down from about 50 artists in my record collection. So this was a nice kind of hit of that vibe for me.
I mean, it nails that aspect of it, but it allows it to go in harder on the music industry that flattens that down, I think. Like I mentioned earlier, that's the line where they get to the Pussycats get to #1 with Pretend to Be Nice, and they have the the full on the montage of, like, going up the charts, which is all very well done. Lovely. But at the end of that, Josie says, "Don't you think this is strange that's happened in a week?" And the other running joke I love is that Alan Cumming has his phone ready, like, to just dispose of another band if he needs to.
Yes.
And the other thing you mentioned about the de jure 2000 to 2001, in that same scene, I don't think it's MTV News, is it? Because it's not actually MTV News, but it's one of those types
of... It's a lookalike
kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, because I think it was a Universal film. This wasn't, so yeah, look-alike news package.
Mm.
But they say like the record label is yet to release a statement, but they have released a commemorative box set which goes on
Yes.
sale tomorrow. And I think one of the really as much as it's a lovely film and it's an enjoyable film, one of the ways it really goes in sharp on is the commodification of the deaths of young pop stars.
Yeah,
It
it's
goes
weird
in
that,
harsh on that.
especially since, Aaliyah and Lisa Lopez auditioned for it. I don't know if the TLC estate might be a bit sort of tight, really. I guess with having two surviving members, they've resisted that kind of torrent of crap that normally accompanies a pop star dying young. But it is a well-worn path. There's that famous Smith song, Paint a Vulgar Picture, which is, Morrissey fantasizing about how the record company will rip the arse out of him when he dies. And we all think this would still be preferable to what he became. But yeah, it's interesting how that point of satire can cross from an indie artist in the 80s who was supposed to be countercultural to being at the heart of this big, colourful, silly studio comedy based on Archie comics.
Yeah, well, it's a darker joke, bearing in mind the Aaliyah audition and everything, where Parker Posey turns around and says, "Why do you think, haven't you wondered why so many rock stars die in plane crashes?"
God,
And
yeah.
yeah, and that they have the Captain and Tennille gag that you mentioned is prefaced by them saying, "We invented a whole program to explain what happened to these artists," and that behind the music is that, and that its style is just explaining away the weird disappearances and the horribleness of it all.
What would the modern equivalent of behind the music be like? I suppose it was like the equivalent back then to these sort of Netflix true crime miniseries where they're sort of crap and they're tacky and they're voyeuristic, but they're slickly
Yeah,
put together and they're kind of Moorish in a way you don't want to admit to.
yeah. Well, beyond 9/11 is an obvious massive cultural moment. I
I
think
thought
this
you were
is
going to
kind
say
of like the
it
last.
was like the equivalent of 9/11. I
No,
thought
no,
that's a bit harsh.
no,
It wasn't quite that big.
no, no. No. But for as an impact on TV goes, reality TV, I think would be the
Yeah.
big change that comes after this. Like there's mention of when they start to try and isolate Josie from the rest of the band. They sort of say you could have your own TV series, and so pretty much everyone does now. A lot of
Yeah.
people who don't make anything else have reality TV shows from that period going forward, I would say. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why. I don't know if you feel the same way. Like, as much as this wasn't a hit at the time, if anything deserves a belated sequel to key into the stuff that's happened since this came out, I
Mm.
think Josie and the Pussycats would be it. I think that considering the cycle now of of the bands that were around then is reunite, do a comeback tour, and cash in big. You could easily enough gear a sequel around that.
Well, that's interesting because I know you said you didn't want to talk about it that much, but I do think we have to bring up the current thing that is making people reassess the media culture of this very early turn of the millennium kind of period, which is Framing Britney Spears.
Yeah, at the time recording, it's just been on in the UK last week. I watched it,
Mm.
and it's quite staggering that this is a thing. I mean, rewatching Josie and the Pussycats soon after, I was thinking, oh right, so we've zoomed right past that in terms of how
Mm.
insane the music industry can be to some
Yeah,
extent. Yeah, I mean, have you seen it as well?
I haven't seen it. I've read a lot
Yeah,
about it, but yeah, I've sort of I can't remember sort of what exactly my feelings when they changed, but I remember that, like a lot of people at the time, I thought Britney Spears was a really silly joke artist who was really overexposed and really desperate for attention. And I just remember over the whole course of the noughties getting this slow sense of, shit, this really isn't funny anymore, is it? What the hell?
yeah. I mean, it gets into basically the media portrayal of that, the way that there was the blanket coverage, and as you said, Justin Timberlake's a little bitch,
I was
basically.
gonna say I always hated Justin Timberlake, and when he came out, his first press tour was just leering about how he had sex with this woman who was forced to pretend to be a virgin because American popular culture is insane. I just wanted to punch the little bastard so hard.
Yeah, the documentary does get into essentially the fallout of that and how she was, she received death threats and stuff, and how much the media narrative went in that direction. How she was, the level of the paparazzos paparazzi, even to give it a plural, the paparazzi people who they interview in the film are absolutely delusional about their relationship with her, about how much she needs them and how much is transactional. There's the guy who was involved in an altercation with her after sort of seeing her coming back from being refused access to her kids, and it's kind of like, oh, I was only asking her, are you okay? I was only out of concern. Can you just give me a quote? Can you just give me a picture? It's absolutely insane. It's one of those things where, like, I say at this point, like, oh yeah, let's do sequel. I sort of want like the fun version of that that the original managed, but equally, it's, you don't want to get into the conservatorship stuff, because watching the documentary, either Britney Spears is well enough to be working and doing concerts and recording music and making everyone lots of money, or she isn't. You can't then have control of her money and be putting that to work and doing all of this. It is staggering to watch, and it's even like there's bits in it that like got to me while I was watching it. It's just the thing of the Free Britney sort of thing of it. It's not to say, oh, both sides are just as bad or anything else. It obviously isn't. Fans are acting out of concern and stuff. But one of the talking heads is that we just want Britney to be left alone by the media. So the presenters of a podcast about Britney Spears' Instagram posts and what she means and what messages she's sending out. And it's like, okay, all right. But that's it's. I think at that point I was just kind of like, fuck everything, watching this documentary, and that guy who went viral, Chris Crocker, I think
I was going to say, was he not the only hero of this whole saga? Because he was the only person who said what we should have all been saying all along, which is just leave the poor woman alone.
Yeah, he got it.
Yeah.
That's who I'd have liked to hear from in this documentary.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it is one of those. It's sort of staggering bit of documentary filmmaking. But to get back on to Josie and the Pussycats, it's kind of like before it did get this nasty. I would say it was before it really got nasty with with Britney Spears and various other ones. But it does. I think it is quite sharp on the commodification of people as assets by these corporations.
Like, of young women in particular, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's I forget the things that he describes them as, but when Alan Cumming is on the phone talking about describing the band to Parker Posey, he says they're like TLC with two white chicks. It's in line with the Buffy meets Chicken Run thing. I mean, it's just this nonsensical shorthand of this meets this, or they're this but with this, and no. By the end of it, they start off doing a gig in a bowling alley, which is another great joke. They make like $5 between them because they have to pay for their shoe rental. Yes. by the end of it, it does stick with beyond brushing their teeth and that stuff. It does manage to stick with the values. As I say, it's a film that likes its characters and wants them to. It's as much as it is a big silly cartoon of a film as well, and sort of broadly used that Hanna-Barbera cartoon structure by having the villains literally unmask Scooby-Doo style at the end of the film, and sort of foil themselves really rather than get found out. It's as much as it's a big lovely cartoon, a big colourful cartoon of a film, it is lovely as well.
We should talk about that central trio because I think they are tremendously well cast, but it is also one of those films which sort of captures a particular moment. It's like those sort of mid-noughties films you see where like the lead actor is, I don't know, Ashton Kutcher or someone, and then like 12th on the bill, it's Tom Hardy. It is a sort of snapshot of, these people were in this position at the time, because it's Tara Reid, as we've mentioned, who had, her own Britneyfication process. And again, I feel a bit grim about laughing at that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely. But this is, I would say, her best performance I've seen. Like, she's really, really good in this.
Definitely.
As much as it is playing like the airhead, it's like absolutely. I mean, she gets a lot of the most quotable lines as well, and she's really, really good in this. She's out
Yeah.
there like making like Sharknado films at this
Yeah.
point, and she's still around. But as you say, she's been sort of dragged through the tabloid ringer as well.
I think one of the things about when an actress or a female pop star like Britney Spears hits this kind of level of, whoa, it's the public train wreck, is it just allows people to like have a socially acceptable vent for their misogyny. Like, have you ever heard the comment? This is a question that I would not ask anyone other than you, Mark, because you're one of the few people I know who
That's
might say
ominous.
yes.
Okay.
Have you ever heard the commentary track to Uwe Boll's film Alone in the Dark?
I'm happy to say I have not, but yeah, I'm aware of the film. Yes.
Like, to listen to Uwe Boll's commentary track for Alone in the Dark, you would think that the only problem with that was that Tara Reid did not take her top off for a love scene.
No.
Like that was the only thing that was holding it back from 5-star greatness.
Oh, that's grim.
Yeah. So yeah,
but yeah, there's Tara Reid. Yeah, there's Tara Reid. There's Rachel Leigh Cook, who I think is fantastic in this.
She is
perfectly
good.
cast.
Yeah. And I was not really familiar with Rachel Leigh Cook. I think she was someone. I looked up what she was doing at the moment. It seems to be mostly like TV movies, and not the TV movies that people bore on about how actually it's so much better than cinema now. But I think she seemed to be someone who could have like chugged along perfectly acceptably. There's plenty of big stars now who have no films that people actually like, but they're just profitable enough. And I think she just had slightly too many flops. She was in Texas Rangers, which was a really misbegotten attempt to make turn-of-the-millennium kids interested in westerns. She was in Antitrust, which is a fascinating time capsule of a time when people other than your mad aunt on Facebook thought that Bill Gates was the worst person in the world. She was in a film called Strike, which was like a really personal project by its writer and director that got absolutely mangled by Harvey Weinstein. So yeah, it's just a run of bad luck, really.
Yeah, it's one of them things where you want, like, being Josie in the Josie and Cats movie that bombed kind of helped in the scheme of things. Well, there are plenty of actors who are male actors who are in films that just keep getting chances, which is distressing. But the other thing with this is that Elfont and Kaplan, who had previously made Can't Hardly Wait, didn't direct another film after this. Really, they said to BuzzFeed in 2017, Elfont said they made a super gunshine to direct again, which cost us. We said no to a lot of things that came our way because we didn't want to go that again unless we really, really love it and we know it's going to work. I think we've lost out with these two because they're doing the sort of thing in this that like Lord and Miller have become really popular for, and like in the present day, like the sort of brand of silly comedy that's on display here is great. But beyond them and beyond Rachel Leigh Cook, it's just funny to look back on this now and the running gag of them negging Rosario Dawson and as if she's not there, as if she's like the non-entity when she is at this point the biggest star of a lot of them.
By a mile, yeah. And it's a really sort of unshowy performance. I mean, Rosario Dawson is one of the most charismatic people in movies, but she seems really content here to just think, all right, Rachel Leigh Cook's got the star part, Tara Reid's got the comedy part. I'm happy just sort of playing off them and giving them what they need to work with, which is really charming, I think.
Yeah, she makes a great foil, but I think she is tremendous at blending in pretty much to any film in which she's cast. I've always said this about her. I ended up at one point when I was kind of on the going to see everything and reviewing it grind. I saw Zookeeper where she managed to have chemistry with Kevin James, and she's whether the film she's in is any good or not, she is always terrific. So it scans in. This is a very good film. She is very good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think they're a really charming central trio, and I don't know, did they learn to play the instruments, or is it just it is pretty good miming? I don't know, but it looks fine, I think.
Yeah, they did go to a band camp before filming started. I was reading about, and essentially, yeah, to look authentic, doing guitars and guitar reed drums, but they did end up the main vocals are by, as I mentioned, Kate Hanley and
That's the way
Beth
to do
Baker.
it, I think. You
Yeah,
can't expect people to be like professional in
yeah,
this kind of situation, but you can
yeah.
expect them to look right miming.
Yeah, in one of the retrospective things I read that I quite enjoyed, I quite enjoyed this as a fact. Kate Hanley talks about bumping into Tara Reid at Perez Hilton's birthday party a few years later, and kind of trying to talk to her about how I did the vocals for Josie and the Pussycats, but she wasn't interested in that, so I started talking to Salman Rushdie, who was stood next to her, which is like, oh, okay,
Listeners,
that's sorry, that
that
took a turn I
story
wasn't expecting.
that story is the 2000s in one nutshell. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of those things, isn't it, where, like we were saying, you get a snapshot of what level of celebrity people were at. That, yeah, listeners, there was a time when Perez Hilton was considered roughly as important as Salman Rushdie. Oh, sadly, no one with the resources to make it happen has put out a contract on Perez Hilton's life.
Yeah, good film though, eh?
It's a good film, yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed rewatching it for this.
I wonder, you mentioned that Kaplan and Elliot were turning quite a lot of stuff down because they didn't want to get stuck, I guess, on a sort of treadmill that they weren't at. I'm trying to think what there was in early noughties Hollywood that they would have been good at. Do you think we were robbed of their Sin City?
Yeah, I mean, if they just carried on making comic book adaptations in exactly this style, I would have been all right with that. Their Batman versus Superman would have been mint. Yeah, I mean, it's as I said, you look at where Phil Lord and Chris Miller are now, and that I would have liked to have seen more of that. They've much more recently done YouTube. The YouTube Premium, I'm not sure if it's on the way out as a streaming service or if it'll be picked up by somewhere else, but currently they've got, I'm trying to find the name of it. They've more recently had a YouTube streaming series come out
Oh, right.
called 2 seconds. Called Liza on Demand. Yeah, that started in 2018. So they've created and written and directed that one.
I think they're more adaptable than Lord and Miller as well. I mean, it's been a very, very long time since I saw Can't Hardly Wait, so my memory of it is pretty poor, but I don't remember it being as meta as this. I think they can do comedy in other registers, whereas Lord and Miller just, I think they've done some things I really like, but it kind of grinds me down with all the jokes about, oh, that was a predictable plot twist. And I just think, yes, please write a better one.
Yeah, it's not fully all the way to that level of meta-ness, but it is closer to that than it is to like the Flintstones, the 1994 one. Incidentally, Elfont and Kaplan did co-write the Flintstones Fever Rock Vegas,
Oh,
which I'm
wow,
just going
the
to mention.
Godfather Part 2 of the franchise.
Yeah, I am just going to mention here because it is, it is a better script than the first one. When you see that first Flintstones film that has 36, like 6 credited writers and about 36 ones altogether, they tried to do a sitcom on steroids, and they wind up being like the same way as like kids' films have like colors and noise for kids. This has like mother-in-law jokes and Halle Berry's cleavage for like boomers who are just coming up, dragging their poor families to watch a fucking Flintstones movie in 1994. But Fever Rock Vegas is because in part because it's written by them. You look back on it in retrospect and go, all right, this is an actual film. This isn't just a collection. This isn't like a Saturday Night Live sketch gone too expensive and too long.
It's a shame because the first Flintstones has a pretty spot-on cast for every part, and the second Flintstones
Yeah.
has one of the most bizarre casts in.
Yeah, it's like, not to get too far off topic, but yeah, like every advantage the first one has, like in terms of its casting and its production value, the second one doesn't, but it does have a good script and it winds up being a better film.
It has,
such as it is.
it has Jane Krakowski in it in one of those roles where you could tell me that this was a fake movie that Jenna Maroney does in 30 Rock, and I would absolutely believe it.
Yeah, it's just something that's like just coming back of a bone in her hair or something. Yeah, sorry, back to Josie and the Pussycats.
Well, I think that's pretty much covered what I wanted to say about it. Did you have anything you wanted to say before we close up for the week?
Yeah, it is worth saying this is quite hard to get hold of at the minute. There isn't like a disc release that's readily available. I don't think it's ever been released on Blu-ray in Region 2. We are due, considering it's the 20th anniversary of this year, 2021. We are due, I would say, a high def re-release, because de jure means high definition. All right, it's like bring out a 4K Blu-ray. De jure means friendship and hygiene and seatbelts, but most of all, in the year of our Lord 2021, it means a high definition re-release of Josie and the Pussycats, please.
Yeah.
The other thing to mention is there is also a making of book of this coming out for the 20th anniversary by Russ Burlingame called Best Movie Ever, a Totally Jerkin Book. That's going to be well worth seeking out by the looks of it. Yeah, I would plug that. I get nothing from that, but it is worth looking into this film. I mean, if we've not spoiled all of it, I would say. So if you've never seen it because of availability, then hopefully that HD release will be coming at some point in the anniversary. Yeah.
Yeah, get on it, Criterion.
Exactly. Yeah, come on. It's about time. The only other thing I'd say is, are we recording all the subliminal messages for this podcast now, or after they've been going on throughout?
What would you put as a subliminal message in the podcast? I mean, donate to our Patreon is a bit gauche, I guess, but
yeah, buy the pop screen earphones.
Yes.
How did you get Mr. Movie Phone to do that? Oh, you slept with him. Incredible. Anyway, I love this film. It's well worth seeking out if it, whether it comes to HD or not.
Indeed, yes. Until next week, listeners, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. Like I say, I am on geekshow.co.uk and horrified.com. You can also find me on the Geek Show's Patreon movie podcast, Director's Lottery. This month we are doing Jacques Audiard, which I think is a bit of a turnaround from our last one, John Waters. But that's just the crazy world of Director's Lottery. Until then, I've been Graham.
There is no such place as Area 51. Sorry, I mean, I've been Mark.
And that's all from Pop Screen. We'll see you next week.